afternoon, everyone. Good evening on the other side of the world. Welcome to Beyond the Outer Realm, the spin-off show of The Outer Realm, which airs on Wednesday and Thursday evenings. We are still broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 FM from the Gulf Coast, 107.7 FM from beautiful New Orleans. Today is going to be a lot of fun because, my dear friend Mark Olly is here, and we always make it a lot of fun, and you never know where it's really going to go. So that's half the fun, just the anticipation. Anyway, primarily today we're going to be discussing, forbidden knowledge, the no-go zone out in the Grand Canyon, what's going on with all of that, NASA having ownership, complete control, black helicopters, all that fun stuff. We're going to get into Antarctica, and if time allows, we might even touch on a little bit of Tartaria. So without further ado, my dear friend and compadre, Mark Olly. Hello. Hello. I know. Hey, hey guys.
Hello.
Hey. So welcome. I hear that you've been on this excursion for the last week.
Yeah. I wasn't going to put anything on social media, but I can tell you because
because it's me.
Nobody will ever find out. Of course they won't. We had an American lady called Jaya staying with us for a while, a good friend of Brandon Thomas, and she wanted to get to Glastonbury, Avebury, Cornwall, Mount St. Michael, etc., which by sheer coincidence, so did we. It's been on the cards for us to do a trip down there for a while. So we kind of joined forces, set off down there. Brandon, if I'm allowed to say, his network jumped in. Yeah.
Well, he's actually going to be a part of our network very soon.
Hey, fantastic. Well, he's a good plug. There's a good plug for Brandon. Well, he jumped in and actually got me and Jaya both at the same time. So we did a halfway point talk about that. Because the bit we did up here was Arthurian Wales. So we did like Bidston Hill, we did the Holywell at Holywell. We did, I'm trying to think about this. We went past the Grail Castle, Dinas into Llangollen, and then on to Valley Crucis Abbey, which in Arthurian lore is Glastonbury, which is the burial site of Joseph of Arimathea. So we did the real one. And then a week later, we went off to Glastonbury in Somerset, which is the other one. I'm not going to say the fake. I am not going to say fake because it's far from it. I always complain every time I go to Glastonbury because it is a phenomenal spiritual site. It's incredible, and it's got lots of stuff going on there. And then it's almost like someone's come along and sort of put this icing of King Arthur over the top. So it's like the sickly sweet, horrible commercial, Arthur this, that, and the other is everywhere. But if you kind of bite through the icing and get into the, the proper cake of it in the middle, then there's a lot more going on there than meets the eye. So it's kind of, for the initiated, it's two ends of the spectrum. North Wales is the last place you'd ever think of looking for Arthur and all the rest of it. But that's the real thing. So everything else is the icing up there. You go down to Glastonbury and you've got to sort of get the Arthur stuff out the way. And then you hit the real thing. We did Chalice-well, we did Whitewell, Redwell, we did all that sort of stuff. High Street, we went down the High Street, checked all the sites out. We got around a bit. We did Avebury, it was great. There's this massive stone circle, million times better than Stonehenge. And it's got the village that juts into the middle of it, so you can actually sit in the pub in the center of the circle. And
you don't have to get on a list or anything. It's all right there.
Just walk in. If you know what you're doing, go on a weekday. There's always space. So we kind of did that. We had a week of sort of bobbing about round up here, and then we went down there and had a week bobbing about down there. So that's the full report back's coming up. Brandon's going to collar us, I think, at some point towards the end of the week, because I came back. I'm now obviously back here at home base, but Jaya is still in Cornwall, and she's there till the end of the week before she flies to the next destination, which is southern France. So she will have
I have people in southern France that I can connect her with if she wants to, they do a lot of the tours down there.
Well, yes,
they could take her to some of the power spots, the locally known power spots.
Ooh, now that's the kind of thing she's doing. She's been doing it for 6 years. She's been on tour for 6 years.
I'm happy to make that connection. I think it would be Like,
Yeah.
get her to some very, very interesting locations, not just the publicly known locations.
Yeah, well, that's basically what I was doing. I was doing that up here and doing that down in Glastonbury, and then I've left her to it down in Cornwall, and then off she goes, and she needs kind of the same equivalent for France. But it was a friend of Brandon's that recommended she came over. We just went and picked her up from Manchester Airport. She's only down the road, so it all worked out really well.
Yeah, it looks nice. I love that. I love that. What a great way to spend a couple of weeks, just fantastic.
Well, she could still work and I could still work, and so we still got on with stuff, but then all these day trips in between, we all sort of managed to get out, and some of the photographs and some of the information, absolutely phenomenal. So I'm telling you the plot. That's another story.
I know. I know. That's okay. You know us.
Yeah. We go where the wind blows us.
It's true, but it's always like really interesting information, So let's continue on with like obscure, interesting places, talking about Arthur and legends and things like that. And, let's get into something like, I think we're going to bop around a little bit, but where do you want to start? You want to get into like the no-go zone of Grand Canyon? You want to talk about Antarctica? You want to talk about Tartaria? Do you want to talk about other obscure places and what your thoughts are?
I think I'm instinctively drawn to start with Grand Canyon because it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? Really, that one. No doubt about it. What a strange place that's become over the years.
It is. And I think if you factor in, there's so many different hypotheses with it, like, it was Atlantis. And when you factor things like that in, like the civilization had gotten sporadic and just sort of moved into different directions. I think especially when they suffered cataclysm. And some people believe that, they dispersed before that. You get into that. And with the belief that some Native Americans come from the Atlantis line somewhere in there, you think it's possible because Grand Canyon is a very sacred place to the Native Americans.
Well, without getting into too much detail, because we could spend all night just on Grand Canyon.
Sure.
If you have a look at the first maps, so now we're talking about Wild West. You're talking about settlers. You're talking about people coming in there. The first settlers who produce maps. All the way down the Grand Canyon, you'll find names that are from Egypt. So that's the first mystery that you get. When you actually look on an old map, I think one place is called the Sphinx, another one's called the Pyramids, another one's called the Temple. So you've got all these strange little areas that have been, I'm going to say, renamed, or possibly they're the names translated that the original tribes in the area were using, something of an Egyptian origin. But it's a mystery. Nobody knows where those original names on the maps came from. So straight away the geography is just screaming out at you that there's something there worth investigating. No doubt about it. From a simplistic archaeological point of view, you could say, okay, whoever it was that did the map saw certain similarities with Egypt. But now you're looking all the way back to the origins of map making. So that's 150, 160, 180. It's nearly 200 years ago, So
at least the Piri Reis map is like, what, 1513, something like that?
I don't think the Grand Canyon's on the Piri Reis. But yeah, I get what you mean. No,
I know. But I mean, like, Antarctica, like it does touch on some generic, but no, well,
that's why I started with maps on the Grand Canyon, because most people don't realize that the Grand Canyon on a map has all these peculiar names running all the way down it. And archaeologically, it was burial ground for I can't remember who the Native Americans were there at the time when the map makers first got there. There's a burial site, a big burial site about halfway down. There's like two caves with the building in the middle, and that's an interesting site. But there are others. There are caves down there that have been blocked up. Miners, have put shuttering on them in the past and things like that. So it really does make you wonder what is down there. Go on, got any more questions of the Grand Canyon? Because there's more to it than that. I've just skimmed over it.
No, I mean, you have these, you have this. I'm just trying to get my thoughts right, because I've got some people who are.
Yeah, I find it quite hard to keep up with all the messages. If people are messaging me, I'm sorry if I'm not replying.
No, I just flashed them up just to raise awareness. But there was a man named G.E. Kincaid. Now, some say that Kincaid never existed. Other people swear that he existed. And in 1909, he was said to have journeyed through the Colorado River, came upon something pretty incredible, which is a high cave in the Grand Canyons. But let's face it, in Grand Canyon, a lot of caves, because there was a really big Native American presence there. It's, like I said, very sacred places. I know that I have a friend who's Navajo, and he's talked about how even like in recent times that they still venture into the Grand Canyon, right? So anyway, he was said to have come across this complex system of rooms filled with strange artifacts that looked like they could have been Egyptian or even Tibetan. So when you say in the maps they had all of this guy apparently saw all of this stuff, and it was like filled. This room was filled, and could have housed, he said, as much as he claimed, like 50,000 people. And I'm just like, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a bit big, but yeah.
But, you know, and the Smithsonian, like there was some article that come, and let's face it, back in the day, selling a story in the newspapers, it's still much like that. But the Arizona Gazette in 1909 told and published about this story. And of course, Smithsonian quickly shut down any investigations into the cave, allegedly, and claims, conspiracy theories. Yet, you know, again, did he exist? We don't know. Apparently he had a camera. Why weren't photos taken? I mean, you're getting into stuff like that. Why was there no evidence? But we know Smithsonian is very known for covering things up, hence giant bones being tossed off into the ocean. That's a thing. I think somewhere along the line, I had heard from a guest who was on that there was a representative or a whistleblower who used to be a part of that Smithsonian who said, yes, that is very true. It did happen. So when things like that happen, now people are confronted. Let's fast forward to modern times. If you try to go into this no-go zone of the Grand Canyon, you are met with armed soldiers. You are met, like this, people have seen black helicopters in the area. And apparently it's under NASA's control.
Oh, okay. Well, two things there. First of all, there are photos knocking around on the internet. But the question is, which ones are real and which ones are AI and which ones have been doctored. There's also, in the same bracket, there's a video of an explorer who finds this entrance to a cave in the Grand Canyon that looks remarkably Egyptian, but also has hints of Babylonian about it, you know, much older. And of course, he goes in through the entrance, and you've got people going down tunnels filled with water. And then next minute, they come across this giant burial that's all like this king buried in a sarcophagus covered in gold. Now, what it looks like to me, that footage is bits of footage from different things all joined together to form like one thing, and then bits of it are CGI'd and the whole thing's blown out of focus. So you know, since the days of CGI, and I always say this, you know, a lot of stuff now is a bit hard to believe. And now we've got AI on top of it, which is making it even harder to believe. Now, I can tell the difference, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there that can tell the difference, even now, because they haven't got it spot on yet. They've not got to the point where you can't get the feeling that there's something not quite right, you know, so you can usually rule them out. But going to the second thing, the sort of black ops military and all the rest of it, it is an incredibly valuable archaeological, environmental, historical site. So you're going to come across that kind of level of security anyway, because there's always the nutcase that's going to vanish off down there, you know, if they possibly can, you know, with a paddle and a blow-up raft and try and, you know, that's going to happen. It's going to happen. Whether or not the military and NASA are using that area for, you know, exercises and what have you, I wouldn't put it past them.
Apparently they weren't there before.
No, I don't think they've been there in the past. It's a fairly recent thing. But then also, you've got to bear in mind, Native Americans are ramping it up as well. They don't want people trampling across the sacred sites.
They do not.
And to be honest, I'm with them on that one. Now, as an archaeologist, I know that the Grand Canyon has a large number of burial sites and sacred sites dotted down its length. So from an archaeological historical point of view, I think that is probably number one on the list. The idea of not letting people find out what's down there is further down the list, you know, behind environmental, historical, you know, whatever it is NASA's doing down there, etc. Somewhere like fourth or fifth on the list is this idea that they just don't want you to take any interest in the canyon. But to be honest with you, with like satellites and, you know, Google Earth and all this,
there are ways.
We can certainly keep an eye on it without actually having to be there. And I mean, it's a no-fly zone for drones as well. I don't know if you know that. So if you turn up with a drone, if you're a TV production company or a member of the public with a drone with a camera on, you're not allowed to fly it over the Grand Canyon.
So isn't that interesting, though?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the human footprint. I do. I understand why it would be a forbidden zone. I mean, let's take away even for a moment the Native American aspect of it, which to me is you know, extremely important because it's their history, and history has to be preserved and it has to be honored. It's sacred to them. We would all expect the same. But let's get into, like, when you mentioned ecology. I mean, you're looking into, like, they have endangered plants there as well. They have to, you know, take care of those species. They have archaeology sites, the Furnace Flats. Right. I mean, that it's in an extremely fragile state.
There's like a flora and fauna side of it. Over here we have these things called SSSIs, sites of special scientific interest. And honestly, you can't put the shovel in the ground without getting, you know, permission in triplicate just go near them. And that's in this country, and I know that the rules are tighter in other countries than they are here. So I've got absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, they're probably more concerned about somebody flying a drone over the canyon, the battery dying and it coming down and causing some kind of environmental damage.
Some of the drones are the size of cars, but then there are others that are, you know, enthusiasts use they're pretty small. Not everybody can afford the big ones.
But you don't want the Grand Canyon full of bits of plastic.
You don't. You do have to. You know, it's funny because there's that theory that people believe it's just an old strip mine, and they still do have mines. They have like asbestos mines. They have uranium mines. You know, obviously they're close to the public for obvious reasons. You know, being AKA safety. Right. And then you have the Anasazi Bridge, which is a prehistoric bridge. And it's also very, very fragile. And then you have caves everywhere that have their own ecosystems, like bats and other wildlife. And, you know, like there are artifacts there. Nobody is saying that there was never an ancient civilization there. For sure, there was an ancient civilization there. But I mean, Mesoamerica, you have all that. People have been there they're showing places now that have, you know, even footprints that go back 20,000 plus years. So obviously, yes, there was somebody there, but is it who we think we are? When you start factoring in, like you say on the maps, this is a Sphinx. This is, you know, it's kind of like, So I don't know. You know, putting your archaeology brain away for a second, do you think that they found something there?
I'm going to say I'm about 70% certain that there's something there that they don't want us to know about, and that it is more than likely historical or archaeological. So it could be anything sort of from about 500 years back, you know, 1,000 years, 1,500 years, 2,000 years. I don't think we're into the, you know, 22,000 years. I don't think we're into the late prehistoric bracket. But I could be wrong. I mean, there could be dinosaur prints in there, you know, washed out from the various levels. I don't have any problem with that. But, you know, at the end of the day, they're just trying to protect it. One of the things we're really good at nowadays is destroying stuff. You know, we just are. Archaeology is guilty of that as well. I've stepped back now out of the whole commercial archaeology side of it and everything, because nowadays people have to do the archaeology in order to do building work and things like that. But at the same time, it's the developer then that's paying the archaeologist to move the archaeology out of the way. So we're still destroying it. We're just recording it as we destroy it. But now there's just a huge pile of what they call grey material, which nobody ever gets to see. It never gets published. It's owned by the developer. Who knows what the hell was there? So it's kind of a mess. Over here in particular, it's a mess.
It's amazing that the developer would be allowed to keep any of that, because
they paid for it. That's the logic.
Yeah, but it's like you say. Like, I think we talked about this on one of the shows you were on. What happens in England when you find like a really substantial find on your property, like, you know, adjacent or part of underneath your house, and you dig down and you find something, or even on your land, you still have to give the crown part of that. So whether a developer pays for it or not, like, don't you guys, as the crown, have the right to sift through it and see if there's anything of like historical value or financial value?
Well, the argument is the archaeologist is there to do that. So up to the point where, you know, they write the final report, that's all done. But then at that point, that report could end up anywhere. Could end up in a bottom drawer. It might never get published. Most people might not even know it exists.
Wow.
That's the problem with the grey material. So it's all been processed, you know, and it's all above board. Everything's been sorted out, you know, etc. It's all on a level playing field. But my argument is it may as well have not been done in the first place if nobody gets to read it. You know, at the end of the day.
You can't see it.
So you're probably in a very similar position with the Grand Canyon. I would say that to sort of sort it out completely, somebody needs to do a proper, full archaeological survey of the entire Grand Canyon. Just not thousands of people going in there, but just one or two individuals need to go in there.
I think it's been done, though.
Well, this is the thing. Why have they not applied the technology while they're in the process of doing that and then put it out as a book?
Well, I mean, if it happened in the 70s, for example, like you have technology that has changed. I think a lot of it can be done through satellites. I mean, we have a whole satellite grid around us, you know, out there. Surely there are some satellites that can be used to be able to.
Well, one of the obvious ones is the new 3D laser mapping. So you could equip the same drones that they use on caves.
Yes.
They could use the same drones under supervision, fly it down the entire length of the Grand Canyon, and end up with a 3D plan that you can actually go and have a look at online. You know, that sort of thing. That's kind of where it's going, because then you took the attention away from the canyon completely, and people can go and have a look at the data. So if there's like a positive outcome to what we're discussing here, that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, I'd love to see that as well. And if it's not happening,
with none of the areas blurred out, don't you dare blur any of the areas out.
You know. Yeah. See, I agree. This is exactly what we were just talking about. The Smithsonian and NASA's covered it up. I mean, what's a better way? I mean, and I think this is pretty worldwide. This isn't just over here. But when something substantial is found, and there's a story attached to it, all of a sudden it becomes an urban legend or a conspiracy. You know, you have to think about where the term conspiracy even came from with respect to being invented by the CIA in the 70s. Right there, that means not conspiracy.
In the old days, you know, they didn't have the sort of range of communication widespread that we've got available to everybody now.
Yes.
What they used to do was they used to find something and then claim that it was found somewhere else. Now that historically for thousands of years they've been doing that. I mean, Mount Sinai is your biggest example. You know, Mount Sinai with its monastery stuck on top and all the rest of it, that was invented by Constantine. The real one is in Saudi Arabia. You know, it's on the map. You can go and find it. So they clearly put the real one out of the public eye and then created another one that's been sat there for 1700 years. And that's what they used to do. Well, they're basically doing the same thing now. They set up a distraction. You know, they set up a fake. They set up, you know, something that's going to undermine the credibility of certain aspects of things. And people are going to go, nah, don't want to do that. You know, that's not right. It's conspiracy. It's this, that, and the other, or whatever. Shove it out of the way. But those things are still worth looking at. They're still worth digging into because there just might be that it's real and they're just trying to, you know, put your eyes somewhere else with smoke and mirrors, you know. Don't look at this, look at that. You know, it's one of those kind of scenarios. So I think there's an element of that, getting back on topic, there is an element of that with the Grand Canyon. I think, you know, there's been a lot of stuff found over a long period of time. Some of that information's leaked out. Then they've jumped on the bandwagon, and there's been a whole load of fake stuff and nonsense that's come out about it. And then all of a sudden they took control of the entire thing, which is a standard pattern for the protection of something that's fragile and, you know, could be destroyed. I think that's kind of where this thread ultimately takes you, but still no excuse for not having some 3D mapping of it. I mean, it's got to be an ideal candidate for that.
I would think it is. When you're looking at the maps, because I'm just having a quick look, because I saved one too. You've got something called the Tower of Ra.
That's it. Yeah.
The Shiva Temple. When you start looking at things like that, you have to say this is pretty much, sometimes these landmark names do suggest there's a bigger truth. You know, when you're looking at things like, you have areas of the park which include geological formations called the Osiris, the Isis, the Shiva, the Horus temples, Tower of Set, the pyramids of Ra.
That's where I came in. Where the hell did those names come from? You know,
exactly.
You know, they're not modern because they're on the old maps. You know, so who was it that thought, that looks like that, and that looks like a sphinx, that looks like a temple? You know.
Yeah.
Where did they come from? You know, and that, as far as I'm aware, nobody's come up with an adequate answer to that.
No, there's a lot of information that pertains to it, and I think so. Hey, I think personally that when so much attention is put on an area by the powers that be. Okay, when it happens, thank you, Cliff. But and they're trying too hard to debunk it. There's something there that kind of makes yes, for sure.
We think they protest too much.
Well, exactly. And you had turned me on to a book. I did purchase it.
Oh, was it America BC by Barry
Yes.
Felt? Oh, what a book!
What a book indeed. And not easy to find and not cheap to get unless you're lucky enough to find it in an old bookstore. I paid handsomely for that puppy, but worth every penny. Yeah. So when you factor that in, you know that there's more than what we're led to believe.
I mean, I was going to say that book's great because it's a perfect example of everything we've talked about up to this point. It's got Phoenician, it's got Egyptian, it's got Roman, it's got Viking, it's got Irish, it's got prehistoric, it's got Bronze Age, it's got standing stones, it's got all this in America to the point where it was banned when it was first brought out in the 1970s. It was just banned all over America. Couldn't get it. That was the end of it. So again, it was a friend of mine about 20 or 30 years ago that put me onto it, and that's how I got hold of a copy.
Wow.
You know, but it is so worth it, and it definitely feeds into Egyptian place names, Phoenician place names, you know, Latin place names. Where did they all come from? What's going on? You know, what we're looking at here.
So, I mean, you know, me just being an average Joe, average Josette, and you being an archaeologist, I don't personally feel, for what it's worth, and you can chime in because your word will hold more value than mine, but I do not believe that the ancient people were restricted in their travel.
They weren't. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. What we almost need to do, and this is what the evidence is pointing to, we almost need to think in reverse. So nowadays, if you want to go anywhere, you get on a road. So in the past, if you wanted to get anywhere, you got on a water course. So that could be an ocean or a river or whatever, because it was safer to do that than it was to travel over land. You could get robbed, you could get attacked. You know, there's wild beasts, you know, all the dangers with land travel. But you could get into a ship and you could just sail. You know, we've got a boat over here. I think it's called the Ferriby boat, and they got the shock of their life when they carbon dated it, because it's an ocean going, tied together, plank built, you know, tar waterproof type boat from about 8,500 BC.
Yeah.
So somebody somewhere sailed over here, you know, 10,000 years ago, and we've got the archaeological evidence to back it up. Well, if they could get here, because we're an island. They could get anywhere, you know. Again, America BC, Barry Felt, the number of different, you know, layers upon layers upon layers of visitors that America has had, way before Columbus even thought about coming out there.
Absolutely.
I mean, the most obvious thing about Columbus is, where the hell did he get his map from?
Exactly. Don't get me started. I'm onto that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, that is a rabbit hole, because the original maps obviously were Arabic, and they went back to the Vikings. And of course, the Vikings had already been there. We know that. That's easy to prove.
Well, the Templars were there in the 1200s. I mean, I think Dr. Catherine Ann Ball found caves down in the Brazil area, which suggests that.
Little known fact about Columbus: even though he was in the 14 and 1500s, when he crunched onto the beach, all his sails had Templar crosses on them. He's a Templar.
His father-in-law was a Grand Master, or was a Grand Master Templar, I believe, in Portugal, who owned a fleet of ships.
And one of the chalices thought to be the cup of the disciples. So he had one. It's thought to be one of the grails. So there's a piece of trivia for you.
Yeah,
which does make you wonder. It does make you wonder, actually, if the Red Chalice of Marseille, it's known as, it's disappeared. I wonder if that's in America. I wonder if you guys have got it over there. That might be the grail everyone's looking for. I'm giving tons of information away now,
I know. It's just a gift that keeps on giving.
American Templar Archeologists, get out there and find it,
I know, it's true. It's true. There's so much that sometimes things are hidden in plain sight. You just can't understand. Like, well, why would it be here? I think we talked about, the Stone of Scotland, like the last time you were on, also about there's a possibility that it is in Canada.
Yeah, it could be over there. They could easily be over there, because the one we've got over here doesn't really fit. It's down to definitions as well.
Yeah,
because if you've got if the Stone of Scone comes off a building that was built by King David back in the day in the biblical times, well, build a building out of one stone. So straight away you've got the possibility that there's more of them. And that's logic. That's straightforward common sense. So where's the rest of them? Where's the rest of the building? Where did they originally come from? I mean, they have looked at the rock over here and they've tested it and what have you, and they're a bit dubious,
Yeah, they won't tell you though. They won't tell you though. I mean, I think just for those who missed out, and we'll just sidetrack really quickly, but Sir Henry Pellet, who was he headed up the Scottish regiment out here, and he built a castle, which is Castelloma, and he was approached by the Royal Ontario Museum, really early days, because he built that castle early 1900s. I mean, it ceased, all the workers who were working on it had to go fight in World War I. And then some came back to finish it afterwards. So that just dates it a little bit. But he'd been approached by the museum about something they had acquired that came into their possession. So he went and he saw it. And being of, Scottish descent, he and his wife, he basically traded, they came to an agreement where he traded an authentic entire collection of a suits of armor collection for this stone. So people are like, oh, it's a rock. What's wrong with you? But there was a belief in it. So we take it because it went into a throne that was an 1800 and something replica. So fast forward modern times. This is a story that came to me by the curator of the castle at the time, because I was a representative for a while. And apparently there was a rabbi who had been visiting from the holy city, like Jerusalem, and he asked to speak to somebody. He was speaking with the guide. He goes, I need to speak to somebody who's more in charge over here. So the curator was brought down. He goes, there are two spirit guardians that are standing on each side of the stone. This is a very special stone. And and many people have reported when they look at the throne, they could not always see the stone, that it was somehow veiled. Not everybody could see it. Well, it was sure and heck there, because I've had my hands all over that freaking thing. I'm touching you, I'm going to pick up vibrations, So that was kind of strange. So she said, that's all we have to go on, the legend of what it is. But she goes, this random man comes from the other side of the world, because it was a tourist attraction, and saw this.
Wow. Well, like I say, you don't make a building out of one stone. So just because there's one stone over here, either up in Scotland now, which is where it is, where's the rest of the building? There's going to be other. There's going to be other stones.
There could be thousands of them.
Who knows? Who knows where they are?
I know. But the coronation stone.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah,
that's different. Yeah, that's a different, But anyway, it's sidetracked. But it is and it's not. Like, we're talking about this legend of something that
the argument over here was that when the King of England came up to Scotland in the medieval period, the stone that he was given was a fake. So actually, there's probably two of them over here. You know, there's one that's always been in Scotland, and then the other one that they've just sent back to Scotland. You know,
you
know, who knows?
I love
Knocking around somewhere, there is the archaeological report for the one from Westminster, the one we had under the, know, the throne. There is an archaeological report for that kicking around,
right?
And I think that it was just inconclusive. You know, they couldn't match the stuff. It looked kind of like it came out of a building, and it might have been, you know, Middle Eastern in origin, but nobody knew. So, you know. It was something really boring, like, you know, the kind of stone it was just like millstone grit, which is everywhere. So it just.
I really tend to think it's sitting in somebody's private collection. I think so, because it would be the only way of really protecting it, is not having it in the public, like everything else, like we've been talking about, even with the Grand Canyon. Protecting the archaeology is so important. But I also think that I understand if there was a really substantial discovery, you know, there, because you would want to keep it's a very difficult area to maintain security on. There's just so many different ways, right? I get that, but it would also be nice in a way. I mean, let's face it, if you offer tours, if it's stable enough, you know, to bring in a mass amount of people, then I think after a while, it's like there's pictures of it everywhere. The allure is just sort of like,
God.
My thoughts, for what it's worth, again. But anyway, so okay, while we're on, you know, I mean, I say this side of the world, it's not like Antarctica. Excuse me, it's not like Antarctica is out in, you know, in the Middle East somewhere. So while we're floating about, let's get into the alleged ancient civilizations that are there, and there's a lot floating around with that. So let's find out what your thoughts on Antarctica.
Wow. Okay. How can I
Let's have some fun.
How can I possibly summarize the entire history of the world in the space of a few minutes?
I didn't know you got an hour.
Oh, dearie me.
You got an hour.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna do this in fairly quick succession.
Yes,
okay?
Of course.
This is what I think I know. This is how I feel. Okay.
Yeah.
The world, the planet, has gone through a series of periods or ages or times, if you like, and each of those periods has its own peculiar civilizations, identities, flora and fauna. It's got its own, you know, disasters, etc. Some of those are only in the archaeological record. Others are in the written records. You know, some of them are actually recorded. If you look at archaeology and geology, that tells you an enormous amount. I mean, geology goes back way, way, way back. Looking at that, what it appears is that we started off with a planet already here. You know, that's where our history begins. We can't get back any further than that. Every time someone comes up with a clever idea and goes, oh, you know what I mean? It was an asteroid and it was all octopuses that came down from space bringing water. And, you know, and every time somebody does that, they only go back so far and then it stops. So as far back as they've gone up to now is that it's a crystal planet and there's always been water here. That's as far back as we can go. And the water discovery, to be honest with you, is very recent. That's only been announced very recently, within, you know, the last couple of months or whatever. They've just decided there's always been water there. It hasn't come from anywhere else. It's not been seeded by asteroids, etc., etc. So then you've got a planet, it's covered in water, and at some point it ends up being covered in life. Now, again, that's another open debate. Personally, because you did say, what's my opinion on this one? Whatever it was that made planet Earth the way it was, started off with one socking great big continent, a huge, huge, enormous piece of continent in the middle of the planet. And on that continent, because there was so much space, you ended up with all the species, okay, patched all over the continent, here, there, and everywhere. At some point, something very big smacked into the middle of that continent. So now you're on to geology. You're talking about the continent of Pangaea, and Pangaea was smacked into by something probably fairly substantial, fairly large asteroid or meteorite, big enough to create the entire of the Gulf of Mexico. That is one big, enormous impact crater. this is where it gets interesting, because there are impact craters elsewhere underneath the frozen poles, which we're going to come to later. So okay, so that now I'm starting to push buttons. Okay,
yeah.
Pangea then begins to float. Okay, so you get continental drift, which is still happening. So this now is relevant to us. This is our world now, and the fallout from that impact wiped out probably what 3/4 of the species on planet Earth. Gone. So that entire world, planet, whatever, gone, disappeared. Since then, species have still been dying out, and we've had lots of tiny impacts and other things happening, and the Earth moving, and volcanoes and tsunamis, and all that kind of stuff going on, mainly as a result of that one massive impact. And those little things have resulted in things like Tartaria and the mud flood, you know, Noah's Ark and the big flood, all the other 87, 88 flood stories that are around the world, they've all come from that. You know, a lot of the minor impacts have had other effects, you know, wiping out species elsewhere on the planet. And it's still going on. We're still having that sort of thing happen because the continents are still drifting. They're still floating. So that really is where we're at. We're in this position now. You know, once upon a time there was over 30 different species of humans, from tiny little 3-foot-high Homo floresiensis all the way up to the giants, and most of them are gone. You know, we're down to us and a scattering of DNA, and that's pretty much it. Probably us and Bigfoot. You know, Bigfoot might be the latest thing is it could be Neanderthal. So, you know, that's it. That's all that's left. And those species are diminishing, you know, the biodiversity is decreasing. So, you know, from about 36,500 species, we're down to about 18,500 now, and dropping at quite a rate. Now, of course, the big question then is, what can we find out to prove all of that? What is there out there, you know, and how long have we got left?
Well,
go on.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the periods of time seem to range from about 7,000 to about 12,000 years. Something seems to happen every, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12,000 years. Something happens. You get, you know, a boom here and a bang there and a tidal wave here. And, you know, something just seems to happen. So I don't really know how long we've got till the next one. It's that sufficiently vague. You know, you've got 5, 6, 7,000 years to play with that. Who knows? You know.
Teresa says the Mark Olly breakdown is my new favorite Once Upon a Time story before bed. Isn't he great?
I'm not the only one that thinks like this. You know what I mean? There's an awful lot of people out there that are barking up the same tree now.
It's true.
Yeah, we've all, and as archaeologists and geologists, there's tons of evidence that backs this up. I mean, the latest one, the best one of the lot I've seen recently, was this fossil of a dinosaur's hind leg. And they reckon what happened was, as the meteorite smacked into the planet, this leg was fossilized. And it's the whole leg. It looks like it's, you know, a chicken leg ready to be butchered, turned to stone. It includes the skin, the muscle structure, everything just wham, the second this thing hit. So there's so much of this tumbling out now. You've just got to tease through all the nonsense and kind of pull out the science, and it's out there. It's definitely out there.
I agree. I think there's definitely, again, things that are going on and things that will never be made aware of. I mean, this is where, again, the Piri-Meis map comes in. You know, like they look at it, it's probably one of the oldest that is used, but they still say, like they say, it's like evidence of a possible ancient civilization. However, they really believe that because of how the coastline had changed when he mapped it, that he got information for something that was even older. When he put this together, right?
The general feeling is Vikings. The Vikings are there in the background somewhere in the content of that map. Because when you break it down, certain sections of the map look very similar to stuff that was coming from the Islamic world, from the Middle East, that then kind of floated across to Europe. But the actual sources, like you say, were many hundreds of years older. The interesting one there is the fact that it shows Antarctica with no ice.
Right. So
that's the kicker with the Piri-Reis map.
Yeah. So is it something that a whole continent under a continent, like under, they say, like if you go under the ice,
Yeah, it shows the ice-free coastline just at the bottom of the Piri-Reis map. I'm pretty sure it's that one that does.
So then, do you believe like there's an ice wall with something beyond it? Could it be part of this, or is this one of those hype things?
Well, it's the trouble with the whole ice wall thing.
Yeah.
It's you're bordering on either the flat Earth or the Dyson sphere theory, where we're on the inside of a ball. The problem you've got with that is if we're on the inside of a ball, we wouldn't be getting impacts. So that's probably ruled out. And the ice wall side of it, it sounds like the residual race memory from Pangaea. Pangaea was one thing. And then everything else was something else. And that, in a nutshell, that's what the flat earthers are saying, that the world, the planet, and all the continents are one thing. And then beyond that, you can't really go any further. Now, in one sense, I think that's where that's coming from. But in another sense, I kind of agree with them. I don't think we can get off the planet. This is it. It's entropic. We're trapped inside it. It's entropy. It is what it is. So I think we are circular, but we're a ball inside a ball. That's how I view it. And I don't think we can get out past the Van Allen belt. We can't break that second ball to get out. That's not doable. Yeah. So I'm kind of with them some of the way to where they're getting the theories from, but not all the way. I don't think we're going to drop off the edge, and I don't think we're going to bang into an ice wall.
No, it's really surfacing though right now, like big time. Like it's in the news, like, well, the alternative news. They're really pushing it really hard. So what are your thoughts then on, getting into the Nazis, and we're getting into something was found, Admiral Byrd, Operation High Jump. Because he even said there was something there. Like in interviews, if you look at really old black and white interviews, it makes, oh no, there was something there.
I have seen evidence that the Germans decided they were going to build a base in Antarctic. And they decided they were going to, do this wonderful thing where they were tunneling and they were building, these dome-shaped things below the ice, connecting tunnels and this, that, and the other. And I'm going to go a step further, because I think there's actually footage of explorers getting into these tunnels and these buildings and what have you. But this is something that back then they didn't take account of. Ice moves. Yeah. It's not like rock. It's not stable. It thaws and it moves. So fairly soon into the Second World War, they realized that this Antarctic base was going to fail, and it was going to fail spectacularly. At some point, the whole lot was going to go, and that was it, And they had prototypes of reactors in there and stuff powering the electricity, lots and lots of very strange German technology in there, which they then had to pull out as fast as they could, because otherwise, if anything happened, it'd be trapped in there, and then somebody can come along and find out what it is, etc. So I don't have any problem whatsoever with the Germans having bases down there. Whether they were flying Das Glock, flying saucers out of there, I don't know. That's open to debate. There are some bits of technology left behind that might indicate that. Or what the Germans did, they were compartmentalizing everything. So they were building certain components and experimenting with certain ideas there, but not the whole picture. They were building bits of it everywhere. So no one person ever got to see everything, except maybe Adolf, but it was scattered. Their technology was scattered. But there's definitely no doubt whatsoever there was a Nazi base down there. Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of them believe that they found an ancient civilization down there, and that they got their hands on some technology. In fact, Admiral Byrd found a whole other landmass there, and I think he nicknamed it the Mary Byrd Land. And apparently the landmass was so large it was comparable to the size of Alaska.
Wow. Well, Antarctica is a lot bigger than people think. I mean, and it's whatever it is, 180 million more tons of ice have been added to it as well this year, so it's even bigger than it once was. I think it was an American survey that went over it and mapped through the ice to see what the landmass underneath was like. So we know what the original continent under there is like, and there's like big valleys and big areas under there that at some point could have supported another civilization. The idea, this is where we get into the same thing as the Grand Canyon. The party line is that they're trying to keep the place completely free of humans, you know, totally clear. It's environmentally sensitive. You know, they've played that card to the nth degree. That is the real reason they don't want people down there, apparently. But people don't seem to have any problem getting on there because there's television crews all over it. There's military all over it.
There's some sections that you can go to. I mean, I've had people on the show like, "Oh, we've been to Antarctica." Yeah, you can. Yeah. But it's very sensitive. And now let's factor in that you have a lot of different countries who have their hand. Everybody's got a base down there. You see these little pockets of everything, and that happened relatively. From what I understand through, again, talking to people who've been on the show, it happened pretty quick. Once one came on, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, I mean, again, if you're getting into, let's say, ancient civilizations, I mean, you know, you had the Great Flood, everybody sort of dispersed, but part of that were the ancient Lemurians who were already down there, who may have come, settled, or the Atlanteans, and they kept going because they believed Mount Shasta is where a lot of the Lemurians ended up.
Depends. This is the kicker. It depends where you put the end of the ice age. When you're dealing with, you know, North and South Pole, whereabouts do you put that coming to an end? Now, this is so recent that it hurts. They've only very recently discovered that actually the ice doesn't always sit in the same place. Yeah, it moves around. That the Earth's poles are not always in the same place, and that the Earth's tilt, the axis, isn't always in the same place. So that's really thrown a lot of the establishment right off the game, because obviously the white bits on each end, the ball can rotate and the bits stay where they are. So that means the ice can move to other areas. It can get bigger, it can get smaller. You know, that kind of planetary planetary motion, it's not fully understood. We haven't really got a grip on what's going on there, especially the amount that the North Pole's moved recently. I mean, it's completely thrown everything off. It's moved for miles. It's heading for Russia, I think, at the moment. It's going like in that direction. Wow. So there's loads of stuff going on within historical time periods. And again, I think this is all the countries that are on Antarctica. They all jumped on there, most of them in the 1950s. As soon as the Second World War came to an end, they were like, yes, we're off. You know, let's have a piece of that. Yes. They all piled on. And they've all got different agendas. They're all watching what's going on, you know. The fact that it's getting bigger, I mean, I don't know what that's doing in terms of the ice age. Right. We're coming to the end of the previous ice age. We know that. This is another good thing about North and South Pole. We can get ice cores. You know, there's so many miles of ice, we can actually turn the clock back and look at what's going on in the layers in the ice, which is absolute genius. I'm so pleased they decided to do that, because now you can actually get graphs that can show you what's going on, which, just for the record, absolutely sinks global warming without any doubt whatsoever as complete nonsense. Forget that. That's just rubbish, absolute rubbish. Anyone that's studied ice cores knows what's going on. In actual fact, we're going into quite a nice period at the moment. Things are actually quite good as far as CO2 and what have you is concerned. So the ice cores are just absolute genius. The answer to things like Atlantis, Lemuria, dinosaur extinction, you know, the formation of the different ice ages, etc. It's all in the ice. It's all there, and that's not the main focus of tonight. I know that, but if people
it's important, because we're in an area covered with ice. So please.
I mean, we're talking about frozen wildernesses. So I mean, if people want to go study those ice cores, it's like it's the last place anybody would look, but it should be the first place anybody that's interested in these subjects should look, because it's all fact. It's all written there, and you know, everybody's had a look at it. You know, the Norwegians have done it, the Swiss have done it, the Brits have done it, the French have done it. You know, everybody's drilled a core and had a look. You know,
it's doing a thing.
It's everywhere. It's not really open to debate. That's the beauty of Antarctica being international. You know, it's a lot of people working together to make that happen. But I think the key to the entire history of the planet is contained in that ice. No doubt about it. I think actually there's I can't remember if it's the North or South Pole. So I've been saying South Pole because I know that they've done that. They've gone over it and they've sort of mapped below the ice. I think that's where the biggest meteorite crater is. I've heard people say it's so big, the crater under Antarctica, that they think that's where the moon comes from. Something hit the planet sideways on, scuffed across the bottom of the ball and knocked the moon off, which then got trapped, up in orbit. That's one theory that I've heard put out.
Wow.
So
yeah,
actually the calendar of the Earth's history, is trapped there in Antarctica. So yeah, it is a hugely important site. Probably not for the reasons people think. And I've seen a lot of CGI nonsense again, it's all over the place, yeah.
Well, we live in the age of AI, so they can get very creative now. But I mean, I think it stands to reason that pre-flood there were a lot of ancient civilizations.
Yes.
Right. And a lot of it's buried. A lot of it is there to be found. But along with that, I think, because not a lot, we don't have a lot of ideas as to how advanced some of these civilizations may have been. And of course, we know people now who come into contact with some of that, even if they hypothesize that it could be something, you're not getting a look.
Yeah, I'm fairly convinced. I am fairly convinced that the evidence is there, and in the tradition of all good, forward-thinking archaeologists and book writers, I think it's a case of seeing things and then admitting that they're true. I mean, the big thing for the last couple of generations has been pyramids. They're all over the place.
They're everywhere. It's a mountain. It's a mountain. Yeah,
exactly. Where's the biggest pyramid? Oh, clearly it's the big one at Giza. No, forget that. There's a bigger one in China. And then everyone's like, China? Oh, China? Didn't know there's pyramids in China.
Yeah, but you notice how China doesn't like talking about them?
Exactly. Well, they're everywhere. We know now for a fact, because of the wonders of the internet, they're all over the place. There isn't a single country, including the UK. We had pyramids. Yes. They're everywhere. They're all over the show. Well, that's a survival of that Atlantic civilization, I think, because it's been scattered and it's gone everywhere. But it must have been there beforehand as well, because it's such advanced technology. It's so advanced. But it's not just that. I mean, there's writing, there's technology like in Egypt where they've got the Baghdad battery with electricity, and they've got
for sure.
a glider that flies, and the Vimanas in India, flying craft that do that. Language itself is universal. These, looking at human species, you've got the stretched heads that are all over planet Earth. You've got DNA scattered all over planet Earth. You've got people, DNA turning up in places where it shouldn't be. And at the end of this, we're at the point, it's all so new, everything's so new that we can't join all the dots. But I am going to predict that when those dots are joined up, take you back to Pangea. It'll take you back to one single giant cooperative, if you like, of different versions of human beings who are all good at doing something. And that's what that technology is. It's been scattered everywhere. So it's possible to strip back and then see things that have survived from that era, and then you've got the classics, haven't you? You've got things like, a string of beads found in a block of coal and a hammer found in a stone, and people bringing up all this stuff from where it shouldn't be, arrowheads stuck in dinosaurs, bullet holes through Neanderthal skulls. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Go and have a look at 14 times. You've only got to flick through that and you realize that things are not as they appear to be. And that's all been brushed under the carpet.
Yeah.
So
it kind of makes you wonder. Why.
Yeah.
Why would things be just brushed under the carpet? I mean,
it doesn't fit the paradigm. It's the biggest elephant in the room is evolution, which is absolute, utter, complete nonsense. Even Darwin said, "I regret writing that damn book" on his deathbed. That's what he said when he died. I regret doing it. It's Darwinism and evolutionism is a religion, because it is not completely provable. Of course, things adapt and things change and alter depending on their environment and natural selection and all the rest of it. Darwin was definitely right with all that. But, the idea, he thought that, we were descended from monkeys, whereas DNA and all that's proven that we're only one chromosome away from a pig. So actually, if we did do that, if we did evolve, we evolved from pigs, not from monkeys. So
it's just crazy. Yeah.
But then we also know through DNA that evolution doesn't work. There's never been a naturally evolving anything.
Not physically, no.
It's never happened. But back to your ancient technology. So I'm not off topic. It can be altered. Now, the question is, I always say this when I do anything biblical, Noah's Ark. Noah had 3,500 years of civilization behind him to develop before he arrived at the Ark. And to the point where we are now, what we call civilization in the West, we've only had 2,000 years. It was 1,500 years ahead of us. He was miles ahead of us. So again, what did they know before the flood? Back on topic again, what was going on then that we still haven't really got a handle on now,
critical thinkers. Well, which brings me to this, since we're again ancient civilizations. There's a lot of natural, obviously, the great floods or the ice ages. Let's go with, what about resets? Which will segue into the next topic. What about resets?
Does the planet reset itself,
or do the powers that be reset again as they get into new narratives?
Well, I don't think. How can I put this tactfully? I don't think we are a sufficiently high enough species to have that amount of clout. Okay, having studied the species that have been around in the past, I did that book, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. I summarized it there. Looking at, what's been around in the past, flipping heck, they could just walk over us without even thinking about it. And some of those species only went extinct about 400 or 500 years ago, So it's not survival of the most intelligent, it's survival of the thugs, the warriors, the ones that have eliminated all the other species around them, and that's us. So I don't think we're qualified. I don't, even at the highest level, I don't think the men in grey can initiate a reset. I don't think they can do it. That having been said, the planet certainly can. I have noticed, even to keep it topical, even in the last week, there's little volcanoes popping up all over the place. Well, there goes Mount St. Helens.
Mother Nature's peeved off.
It only takes that to happen enough, and that's 3 years of nuclear winter and no crops, and Darwin called it natural selection, and he's absolutely correct. I'll go with him on that one. It's like, that's it, we're wiped out. A couple of decent sized volcanoes will put our technology out. Forget flipping solar flares coming in and frying microchips. There's so much electricity and activity and stuff going on over a volcano that it's like an EMP. It'll just take out everything within miles and miles radius. The planet itself, the actual thing we're living on, I don't think we pay that anywhere near enough respect. It's okay thinking that just because we can build a skyscraper, we're the most intelligent monkey on the planet. That's just nonsense compared to what can happen. A little bit of a meteorite here, or a bit of a volcano there, or tornado here, or tsunami there, or whatever. It's all gone. It's all gone.
I think as a collective, certain powers that be, as a worldwide collective, can sure make it, let's just say, you control the financial system, you control the military, you control a lot of things that can alter the way we see life. I guess is the best way to put it. And there's again, there's things that were there at one time and the things that weren't. So we'll slide into Tartaria. and essentially, because this is, people are all about it. It's like there's something that's come up. Don't get me wrong. Some people have been on this for years, just researching it, and others have caught on to it and went, okay, I want in on this. What is this? Because there are a lot of interesting photographs that are out there. Again, you'd have to sift through the CGI and the AI,
Yeah.
but we know Tartaria. They're the lost empire of Tartaria. Okay, and it's mud flood conspiracy. So when you're looking at, there's historical reasons, scientific, and of course you have the the conspiracy theorists, but it was an actual empire in the region of Asia known as Tartary, right?
Yeah, that's where the Tartars came from. Yeah, southern
There
Russia.
you go. So do you
Big
want to
strip
go?
across the bottom of
All right.
southern Russia.
You
So
take it and I'll go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things there that come into play where you are dealing with facts.
Yeah.
Very clearly, at some point, there was a mud flood. There was a worldwide cataclysm that took out an awful lot of what was already there. And it's interesting that, Noah's Ark lands on Mount Ararat. Mount Ararat is kind of on the very far right-hand extreme of what you might call Tartaria. So clearly there's everything there connects up where you've got lots of damage, the floodwaters, desist, and whatever's left over then decides it's going to develop. Now, the thing with Tartaria, the second part of this, is it really did exist. There really were Tartars. They came from southern Russia, and it's not that long ago. It's on maps coming up to the Victorian era. It was still there.
Like the last couple 100 years or 150 years. Yeah,
you're only a few generations away from us.
Yeah,
but and this is the thing, the Russians don't see it as the same kind of mysterious empire full of technology that we see it as, and it's very difficult to get rid of the nonsense, all these CGI photographs, and the ones that annoy me most are when they get hold of a building, shove it into AI and add about 4 or 5 stories below ground, and then make it look like an archaeological dig, and as a professional, I just take one look at that and go, well, that's nonsense. Absolutely complete and utter nonsense. It's not like a 5-story building that's been flooded up to the first 2 stories. And those buildings, people are going, well, we couldn't possibly have built them. They built this building in 475 days or something. We couldn't possibly do that. The reason we can't do it is we're glued to the flipping internet and our mobile phones and everything else. You know what I mean? If you've got a workforce of 10,000 people and all the materials are done somewhere else, you can assemble a building very quickly. I had a great one. Brandon will hate me for saying this because I was on one of his podcasts and we were chatting about this, and somebody said, well, it's got to be really mysterious. These have got to be built, Tartarian buildings all over the Americas and that. And the way you can tell that they're Tartaria is that they don't have any toilets. And I'm like, yeah, but they didn't put toilets in buildings when these were built. They put them outside.
Outhouse.
I know this as an archaeologist. They didn't even have flushing toilets till the late 1800s. So they're looking at all these buildings and going, well, there's no toilets inside them, so it's got to be Tartaria and mysterious. And I'm like, nope, they're outside. They're in another building. And all that's happened is over a period of time, those other buildings have probably been knocked down, filled in, and something else put over the top of them.
For sure, they're inconsequential.
Because they don't need them anymore. They've got proper toilets and what have you. But it's things like that if I see the word Tartaria, I tend to skim over that. If I see mud flood, a little bit more serious.
Well, that's the conspiracy part.
Let's see what they've got to say, because that's sucking up a lot of good information. It's pulling in a lot of real facts. Real stuff gets sucked into the mud flood thing. And then Tartaria is an archaeological thing. The Tartars, southern Russia, etc. That's an entire, it's an entire kingdom. It's an entire race of people. They are, in fact, the last incarnation of Genghis Khan and the Mongols, the Mongolian Empire that stretched across southern Russia. They became the Tartars. I think I'm right in saying that. I'm trying to remember my Russian history. I think that's where that ends up. So actually, they've probably got more affinity to northern China, than Russia. But that's what it is. You're looking at the Mongolian Empire, really, but in a later, later form. So it's a really frustrating craze. It's an internet craze because everyone's jumping on it and posting all the, if somebody's on my Facebook and they post any of these, CGI'd photos and they're all, oh, Tartaria, this, that, and the other, I'll just go delete.
Mm-hmm.
It's baggage. A lot of it's baggage.
Yes.
Which is a real shame. It's.
Yes.
I do wonder if maybe the CIA are behind it and they're just trying to, blur everything out in the way that they do, disinformation, and just kind of go.
Well, I mean, that's what I mean.
History is no longer. Let's get rid of the facts. Winston Churchill said it best, because he said the further back you look, the further forward you can see. So they don't want us. They don't want us digging around in the past.
No. He who controls the past controls the future.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
you take out that information and you put forward other unbelievable things that people gravitate to. But you have to admit, when they talk about the Tartarian age, it's going into things like, which Nikola Tesla completely believed in, drawing energy from the ether. You have these high, incredible buildings, like even in Europe, they would say like the Anderons that you would use for the fireplaces, because the fireplaces were like the size of bloody house, right? Big things, and that they would connect up. They would internally connect up to the ether. Like they're drawing energy from the ether, things like that. That's a Tartarian thing.
No, well, they're not. They're fire dogs, and they've evolved. They're the same fire dogs.
I use them.
that the Celts passed on to the Vikings, who passed on to the medieval times, etc. Till you arrive.
But not that they weren't.
I've got two of them in my fire opposite here over there. There's two.
Yeah, I use them as well. I did.
That's what fire dogs are for. They're not for collecting energy. Just because there's a ball on top doesn't mean it's going to suck energy in. The Victorians thought it looked cool. Basically, they thought that was really good.
Victorian thoughts everything. Right? Like everything. That's a show in itself.
And if you went to Nicholas Tesla and you went Tartaria, he'd go, well, what have the Russians got to do with this?
No, but I think where they're going is, in an age where free energy, they talk a lot about Tartaria. It's a lot about the world fairs. This thing went up in like 60 days, and some of these world fairs are like unbelievably elaborate. In fact, we have in Toronto, where the world fairs we still have it. It's called the Canadian National Exhibition, and the gates to it are complete Tartarian design. They're complete concrete. They're with wrought iron. I mean, they are fancy. They've been there since the first World Fair that took place there, and they're like, you would have these big blimps going on, and they could just power up. You see, there's a picture of one, like it's old black and white, up at the CN Tower. There's this big spike coming through the top, and it's anchored there, and it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. If it's real, that's very interesting.
Well, you see, I don't have any problem with the technology the Victorians had,
which we can't have now, though. Notice that.
Yeah, that's the thing. Now, well, it depends if you go down the reset route or if you just go down the who is being selective.
Yeah.
Because I believe that's happened in the past. It's like the Egyptians. Yeah. I think somebody in Egypt had electricity. They just decided they weren't going to use it for the purposes that we're using it now. They had it for some other reason. In India, I think it's Mohenjo-Daro. There's a village not far from there, and it's been completely turned to glass by an atom bomb. It's frozen completely. Skeletons are in the glass, buildings are in the glass, properties in the glass, everything's just been turned to glass. I think somebody was, tampering with nuclear technology, got it wrong, it went boom, and took that out, and they never touched it from that moment forward. And I think that's been going on selectively for thousands of years. People have just decided what they're going to use and what they're not going to use. And it got to the end of the Victorian era. I mean, the Victorians were mental, mad as a bag of frogs, because at the end of the day, they'd do anything. Madame Curie, is mucking about with, all this radioactive stuff, and you can't get near her notebooks now for 1,000 years. They're in a lead box. She died of that, because they didn't care. They'd have a go at anything to see what it would do. Yeah. And I think we've got this position now where people are going, well, yes, we could use wind energy, or we could use gas in balloons, or get power from windmills or the ocean or whatever. But you know what? Petrol. You know, we're still fossil fuel. This is it, fossil fuel, which incidentally doesn't come from fossils. You know, it's not. It's actually a lubricant that the Earth produces for the Earth's crust, and it's there all the time, constantly being generated. So, but that kind of fuel, you know, which has ended up fueling everything and producing plastics, has not had a good end because we haven't used it wisely, you know. So I think there's some of that going on. There's like one party that says, you know, real environmentalism, and this is really what we can do with it, and this is where it's going, and they understand what's happening. And then there's another party over here going, hang on a minute, we can make a few bob out of this. This is all about money. You know, we can't do this because it's going to cost this, and we're going to lose our jobs. So we're seeing a huge amount of that going on now. Everything, don't even get me started on the green agenda. Everything is not green, period. That's the end of it. You know, the fact that we're still living and breathing isn't green, you know. So they've had to do all this and make all of this up because they realized that sooner or later the electronic side of technology and all the rest of it would just be everywhere and commonplace, and they can't make anything new out of it. So it's new economy. That's what you're looking at. So they're constantly trying to generate this new economy, new stuff, you know. They're all investing in things like wind farms and stuff like that, and that's why they're popping up everywhere. Solar panels, because that's where that's popping up everywhere. I think the only place in the end that's actually going to survive this technological revolution will probably be China, because they're being quite sensible, and they're going, well, why, you know, if it's not broke, why fix it? Let's just stick to what we know and just make sure we try and do it properly, you know, and do it right.
No, I mean, I agree with everything you say, as I always do. You know, but you know, they have the Tartaria tablets, which were found in Romania. Right? Have you heard about those? And they believe they could be 1,000 years older than what was anticipated.
Right. Okay. As far as I'm aware, there are a number of written scripts that go back to about 7,500 to 8,500 BC. And none of them are readable. So that sets the little alarm bells going, you know, 10 to the dozen. Why are they always tablets? You know, most of the ancient writings have ended up on blobs of clay or stone or you know, walls or whatever. And I think, you know what, I'm going to stick my neck out. I think I have actually seen images of them, but the images I saw were CGI'd. There's no doubt, 100%.
Well, this specific one is pretty well documented, and I don't even think it's very big. You know, I think it goes back to some of the Sumerian stuff, but I do find if it's found in Romania, that would be close to you know, the region, I think.
Well, Romania and southern Russia and all the states that were part of that area, they write in Cyrillic, and they use a different alphabet, and they use a different language pattern.
Let me see if I can get a picture.
Very, very difficult to read.
See, they have different Tartarian tablets, actually. I'm just trying to see if I could find a picture of one. I mean, is it difficult to read? I don't know that it's difficult to read. You just have to know what you're reading, I suppose, if that makes any sense.
Translation is difficult because I'm regularly handling ancient languages. I'm regularly trying to deal with them. They're not written in the same direction. Sometimes they have the vowels left out. Very often when they come back, they don't come back as intelligible words. So you're dealing with transliteration, not translation. You know, honestly, it takes a special kind of brain to do it. Now, the argument might be, they might come back with the argument that, well, they were translated by AI, you know.
Who knows? You know. I'm just pulling up an article. You can have a boo at it. Here you go. So this is what they're essentially...
right, that's cuneiform. That's cuneiform. So that's... it's either Babylonian or Sumerian. It's one or the other. I don't stand any chance of reading that.
Mesopotamia. I could send it to you if you wanted to.
That's okay, but that's
the
Sumerian.
Oldest examples of writing from Mesopotamia.
Well, that's readable. I mean, to be honest, looking at that, if I'm being totally honest, it looks like a shipping receipt or a stock list for a warehouse.
I'm going to try to make it bigger for you.
Hey, that's better.
Hold on. I'm trying. There we go. How about that?
Right. Okay. That's a manifest for a ship, I think. I'm pretty sure. I don't know where they're getting Tartaria from. I don't know. It looks like
well, it just says up at the top. It was made at Tartaria in the Transylvanian region of Romania. Carbon dating more than 1,000 years older than the oldest Sumerian ones.
I was just going to say, looking at that, actually, it's not Sumerian, Akkadian, or Mesopotamian, or Babylonian. It's something else. That's the same as what is on the Phaistos disc. It's pretty much the same text. I can see a circle with an equal arm cross. They're objects with certain numerical values put above them. So it's more likely to be a shipping receipt, but it is one of the very primitive. That's real. That is actually real. It is one of the very early impressed tablets. Yeah. Not the one I saw that somebody was parading around as being.
I imagine if people start digging around and seeing something that like this, it's like, you dig, eventually you'll find something. How many things that are out there, people just absolutely know what they're looking at. Yeah. So I don't know. I thought I would share it up because I thought, being an archaeologist,
that's actually a good one.
It interesting.
Yeah. I'm impressed. That's a good one. 10 out of 10 for that one. That actually is what it says it is. It's an older archaeological report. And I would imagine somewhere, because I can't read the text, but somewhere in all of that, it will say that it looks like it's an inventory. That's what I think it is, an inventory. The same as they've finally decided the Phaistos disc is, although that's round and spirals in, and it's impressed with stamps. So it's an inventory of some kind. I think that's what that is. Whether or not that proves Tartaria is, another issue.
It is interesting. I thought, what, there's so much. These are three ancient civilization these locations where it's all believed that there's something, that there's more to what we are being told. I guess was the theme that I was going with. So there's a conspiracy behind each of them. And being an archaeologist, I thought, okay, let's go for some logic, and and then let's just throw out.
Well, I mean, let's face it. Grand Canyon, they're not really telling you anything about. Antarctica, almost impossible to find any information out about. And believe it or not, Tartaria, southern Russia, the last days of the Mongolian Empire, that is really difficult. I mean, who's going to go and, phone an archaeologist in Moldova or, Ukraine or Bulgaria, no, Macedonia? Who's going to have a look at any of these different archaeological networks to get the information necessary to do the research? And it's really difficult. I've been to Bulgaria. I've had a look at some of the things they've got over there. Yeah. It's not an easy subject to tackle when you're dealing with things in those areas, And again, if you go far enough in that direction, you finish up, with Mount Ararat on, on the Turkish border and all that kind of stuff. You're right, way over past the Black Sea. There's like a whole strip across that lower part of Europe, and it's got all this really important stuff in it, mega super duper important stuff that nobody ever goes to, nobody ever looks at. The idea that the Garden of Eden is somewhere up there in the Ararat range and that kind of region is not totally out of the question. There's all sorts of theories have been put forward to what's in that area. I mean, Turkey, for goodness sake, you know what I mean? You've got Göbekli Tepe, you've got the whole of that happening in 12,500 BC. Ice Age comes to an end, wallop, up goes a temple.
But you know what? With Göbekli Tepe, they obviously, all of these, there's different tepes that they reburied. But why is Davos? Why is certain powers that be growing trees over top of it now? For future archaeology, you just dug it all up, man. And there's so much more that's underground. Why would you plant trees that could destroy all of that?
Yeah, trees are destructive. If
you do an overhead on that, you will see a forest on there right now. Yeah. What is so special?
Not good, because I think, again, further back you look, the further forward you can see. I think they're just covering all of this up. There's been a huge explosion in information, and there's no doubt about that at all, in all areas: cryptozoology, ufology, archaeology, anything with an ology on the end of it. Loads of information. And now they're pulling back, they're backpedaling, and they're just putting this layer over the top of it all, going, well, hang on a minute. we don't really want the population to know about this. You know, this is a different thing. You know, they're more concerned about running around going, hey, we're all going to get wiped out by germs, you know, when in reality we're more likely to be hit by an asteroid. You know, they're just trying to keep control of the whole situation. They are never going to destroy us. They're never going to get rid of us by nuclear war or by germs or by, you know, anything that they do. They're not going to wipe us all out. That's just scaremongering. However, volcanoes, tidal waves, asteroids and meteorites, you know, getting rid of all the trees is a bad idea, you know, things like that, killing all the insects and stuff, you know, all that sort of thing. You know, I look at it. I mean, I've been around long enough now to look at it all and think, are they just trying to make some money before they go? You know what they're trying to do? Are they trying to somehow build something knowing that sooner or later nobody gets out of here alive? So, you know, what they're doing, why are they doing it the way they're doing it? That bit doesn't really sit right with me. It doesn't make any sense. And the whole cover up doesn't make sense.
No, but again, I think it's it's a whole other show. It's changing the narrative. It is, you know, I mean, there is a whole group of individuals out there who know everything. They have all the history of this world from start to finish for the most part, you know, and when it's off limits, it's because they just don't want it known. But there's only so much. Eventually, there are some incredibly gifted people out there who can tap into places. And the CIA trained a bunch of remote viewers. You know, I can't tell you how many gifted remote viewers I knew. Some trained by the CIA, some not trained by the CIA. They're just natural.
Well, I think you know, I started out as being a traditional archaeologist. That's what I wanted to be. Yeah, you know, the whatever it was. Indiana Jones for 1970. That's where I started.
Right.
The whole job now has completely altered. What I'm doing, I feel like I'm just dropping breadcrumbs, you know, for the next lot to follow, because the information is so disparate. It's so hard to find. You know, it's so difficult. You know. There's so much stuff out there that isn't right that you've almost got to tease all of that out. But the best you can hope to do is just leave it parked somewhere in the hope that somebody will find it, you know, which is really not good. I'm never going to become a millionaire off anything I've ever done, because nobody is ever going to want any of it released, you know.
No, it's true. It's true.
Crazy. I'm never going to make it big time because I'm not singing the right narrative, you know.
No,
but
you have to play ball. You have to be part of a club.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, I mean, I could sat here talking twaddle and nonsense for the last goodness knows how many years, but no, I'm as long as the books are out and they're out on Amazon and people can get hold of them, and you know, at least the seeds are out there. If one copy of that book survives and inspires somebody to move on to the next stage, you know, that's what I'm about. I'm just you know, pushing people further up the ladder. But I don't think there'll ever be an end to it. You're right. You know, the powers that be just don't want some of this stuff out there. They really don't.
But you know what? That's where you have to look at alternative stuff. And that's why you have to learn to read between the lines. You have to listen to different shows. Or, I mean, one thing about there's like probably millions or billions of podcasts out there, and there are people talking about it. And, you know, even if you catch a grain of something that resonates with you enough to research it yourself, you might just be that one person who makes a real difference with it.
Yeah, that's the key. That is the key. And the more individuals that are making a difference, then the greater the difference overall, you know.
Yes. Okay. So what do you got coming up? Aside from, you know, another episode of Beyond the Outer Realm, August the 5th with conspiracies.
Whoa, really
but
secret
societies and who's really in charge. That's what we're going to do.
That. Well, that's actually kind of where we've just left off, isn't it? You know, the powers that be.
It's funny how we do that.
Let's take it to the next level. I'll do the usual advert. I mean, I've already done one. If anybody wants any of my books, go and find them on Amazon. They're all on Amazon. You know, click for purchase and they'll come whizzing to you, courtesy of the Amazon delivery service, anywhere you want. if you want to get the latest book, which is probably the UFO one, you could try and go for that, Europe's Roswell. But at the moment, I'm particularly trying to push the Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph, and Arthur. That's a belter. That's a humdinger. That's the one I really want to see out there. So that's a good one.
Yeah, watch the episode that we did on that show. It was like amazing.
Yeah,
all of Mark's episodes are on YouTube.
We've covered a few of these. So
we sure did.
Which then leads me on to the second place you can find me. You can find me all over YouTube. You can find me all over the internet everywhere if you just do a search for me. There's tons of stuff out there you could binge watch for a lifetime by now, I would think. Especially, of course, here. Come and find me on here. And then if you want to contact me, well, I know Facebook has been a bit of a swine recently. It's been mucking and messing about, and they've been changing stuff, and Messenger doesn't work if it's end-to-end encrypted. And oh, listen, if anyone from Facebook's listening to this, take it off. It doesn't work on laptops. I work with computer programmers here in the UK, and basically you cacked it up. You've come up with a system that's great on a mobile phone and doesn't work anymore on laptops, and I'm all on laptops. So, get it sorted. But yeah, I'm on Facebook. That's pretty much where you can get me. So if you can get a message to me on Messenger, you can do that, or, somehow make contact that way. And if in a worst case scenario, you can talk to me by email or whatever, we'll find some way of communicating.
Just message me and I'll forward your email to Mark, worst case, because people can just message us everywhere. So
if you really can't get through, message here. But those are the three ways, really. You've got Amazon for product, YouTube for the visuals, and Facebook for me. That's really what's coming up. Well, I'm doing a biblical book. I'm going to do a biblical one. So some of the stuff that's been dug up by these podcasts have got me all fired up now. So I'm going to do a book of biblical proportions, and I'm going to see what I can make of that. So a lot of this will be in that, because obviously subject-wise, things like Noah and the flood and all this. But that's coming. That might be next year before that's completed.
That would be very exciting.
Oh, it's going to be a good one.
If you're right, I know it is. I know it is. I know. I'm already looking forward to it. Thank you so much for coming back on. I'm already looking forward to the next one.
So am I. All the things we can't say is going to get included in that.
It's going to come out. It's going to come out for the uncensored version for sure. We're just going to go crazy and just do it. And that's the one you have to go to the other platform to watch. So we all know the drill, right? We all know the drill. So thank you very much. Thanks to everybody who hung out with us in chat today. You guys are a really good amount of people in there. A lot of positive things to say. So thank you. How's in the outer realm? Oh, I don't know, Heidi. I don't know, but it's okay because we are finishing it off. So anyway, thank you all. Tomorrow night. Well, I guess next week, I guess I should start with Joe Montaldo, uncensored, open mic. We never know where Joe's going. I couldn't even tell you what he wants to talk about, but it's going to be good. Always is. Well, tomorrow night, Joshua Kutchin is going to be talking about the similarities between the UFO phenomena and the Fae folk. And and Thursday, a friend and paranormal researcher, Dan Hammond, researching the obscure, the paranormal, and the cryptids. I can't not believe the pictures, the amount of people who send these incredible cryptid pictures to him. That he has sent me a couple, and some like Dogman. And I'm just like, that looks pretty freaking real. So not something you'd want to share space with, but anyway. Hopefully he'll bring them along to share them, and we can have a little bit of a parlay about that, because some things need to be parlayed. Just saying. So again, thank you so much for joining me, Mark, and thank you guys to chat for spending the afternoon with us. Good night. Good afternoon. See you all tomorrow night.